I've seen that there's this idea that you really bring to the table about servant leadership. I really want to understand, when you say servant leadership, what is that? And when you talk about that, how has that really integrated into the philosophy of your leadership style?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll go back to my dad again, who was really my mentor and somebody that I had a tremendous amount of respect for, not only as a person but also as a professional. He was the general manager as well as VP of sales for his company, and he was again in the food manufacturing business. So he ran a plant in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I saw the way that he interacted with his employees when I would do luncheons or family visits to the site. And it really made me realize that it didn't matter if it was the person sweeping the floor or the general manager running the actual plant on a day-to-day basis. He treated them with such respect and reverence, and really understood them personally as well, that really inspired me to say, hey, when I eventually get into a leadership role, when I get into a situation where I have people working for me, I want to treat them in a similar manner. So while I didn't understand what the term servant leader meant at that time, it was servant leadership in action. And so when I again got in my career and started having the opportunity to manage people and manage organizations, I really applied that philosophy. And very simply for me, it is to be of service to those that either work for me or, more recently in my career, my clients, as a client services executive. And what that means is really that my job is to be a facilitator of whatever it is we're trying to get accomplished, and accomplishing it through people, not directing them, telling them what to do. Yes, there are times where you have to direct and tell people what to do, even your clients sometimes. But generally speaking, it's really about empowering them to be successful through guidance, through support, through empathy, through whatever it is that is required in order to be able to make sure that we're accomplishing what it is we're trying to accomplish. And again, whether that's meeting a deadline, whether that's hitting the KPIs and SLAs in a contract, whether that's helping somebody get to the next step in their career, whatever that might be, whatever that deliverable is, it's really being of service to either my client or my employee, to help them achieve that goal through empowerment and support, and just again providing my guidance in helping them achieve that.
So I can imagine, right? You're not going to run into too many leaders that say, "Yeah, screw my team, whatever." They're just this thing in the background that's a cost, right? You're not going to say, "Screw my customers, or whatever." Most leaders are going to say, "I care about my staff," at least in public, right? And they're going to say that they care about their customers.
Sure.
Are there any tangible things, like an example of like a situation where you'd say this is really servant leadership in its real form, of how it's manifested in an organization you've had, versus here's when it's not. Here's when it's about just the leader or the bottom line or whatever ends up being the rationale people have when they're running their business? Anything in particular comes to mind?
Yeah. So I would, two ways. One, a more recent example with a client situation. Most recently, let me start over again. So two examples. One with in a more recent client example. I took over a line of business that was really struggling, was not doing well. Client was not happy, on the verge of getting fired, and really had very little patience for us because we had gone through several leaders before I took over. And I immediately dove in, understood what the situation was by interviewing everybody I possibly could, including the client, and figured out what we needed to do differently. And within 90 days of that, we not only did we secure the business, but we actually ended up growing not only that line of business, but we also ended up adding an additional line of business, which dwarfed the line of business that we were trying to save. And we went from roughly 40 agents when I took over on this very shaky line of business to 800 agents on multiple lines of business within about 18 months after I first took over. And what really drove that was that I sought to understand what the situation was and really, again, act as a as a servant to the client to understand what they needed for us to do differently, but as well as to understand internally what was going on as to why we were unable to perform up until that point and what we needed to do differently in order to be able to make that happen. So with that kind of dual approach on serving internally as well as with the client, we were able to make magic happen and, again, turn a lemon into the proverbial lemonade. From a employee standpoint, I've had many examples, but this one goes back a ways. But I would say the one that I'm most proud of is when I was running marketing for AT&T West back in the day, and I was able to not only build a great team of people around me, that some of which I still stay in contact with today, but more importantly, I was able to help 4 different people on my team grow from literally just a first level manager into now, one of them is a VP with the company, and several of them moved into director and executive director roles over time. And that all just came out of creating an environment of success, of empowerment, of enabling people to maximize their capabilities. So I'm really proud of that, because it literally changed their lives and it made our organization, of course, that much better. But you also asked the question conversely, situations where that's not been the case. Excuse me, I have many of those, unfortunately, as well. But I would say, the cases where that's been, I guess most impactful in terms of on a negative basis, if you will, have really been more with leadership above me not supporting what it is I'm trying to get done, and as a result, in effect, sabotaging what it is I'm trying to accomplish. So, I got to leave the names out of it, but I guess the point is that if you don't have leadership that's on board with you to create an environment that supports, again, the servant leadership mentality, then it becomes really challenging to be able to do that, because you can only get so much done without the support of your senior leadership.